All right, welcome back, AP. I don't know how it looks over by y'all, but right now we're getting a lot of snow. Definitely didn't see school being canceled today, but it is what it is. But let's go ahead and pick up where we stopped yesterday. And I know Nick and Becca, you guys weren't there. Y'all were on the Spanish field trip, so just go ahead and get caught up when you can from some other people's notes. But yesterday we started talking about the development of like science and thought during the late 1800s in Europe. We got to Mendeleev and talked about how he's the Russian father of chemistry and discovered the periodic laws, atomic weights, and advanced the ideas of the periodic table, trying to reduce everything down into what's most basic, elements versus compounds. And this is going to lead to the analysis of bonds, double bonds, and different other different areas of chemistry. And of course, chemistry, like we said in class, is later going to be subdivided into new branches like organic chemistry, which is the study of carbon compounds, right? Yeah, so we're carbon-based life forms, right, Sam? And Faraday, of course, is going to be another thinker. This one we didn't quite get to. We got cut off by the bell. So Michael Faraday is a British scientist. He is actually going to be the first person to really discover the laws of electromagnetism. And he's going to figure out actually how to create the first dynamo, which actually is a generator, and the idea of converting kinetic energy into storable electric energy using, I believe his dynamo used a copper filament, which actually a lot of different devices use even today. Now, these discoveries are also going to bring on the ideas of R&D. R&D being research and development. So these two guys are going to kind of help set the foundation of science as it builds forward for consumer use, right? So this is another huge output of the Industrial Revolution, the idea that science is now aiding modern and regular everyday people, okay? So, there we go. Continuing forward, though. Then that's going to bring on what's known as the Second Industrial Revolution. So the Second Industrial Revolution is towards 1880 to about the early to mid 1900s, and it's going to be a burst in industrial activity and creativity in technological innovation that promotes a really strong economic growth toward the ends of the 1800s. So, and what I mean by that is it's going to develop. So we talked about in the Industrial Revolution, Savary, Newcomen, Watt, the guys like that, and the creators of the spinning jenny and the power loom, setting the foundation for a consumer-based economy and a consumer-based revolutionary idea of industry. It's going to keep going forward, and it's going to turn toward its focus towards even more modern-day applications. Things such as smaller interchangeable machine parts, the processing of rubber, creating a very good process of rubber, which actually, this is right before the first true automotives are going to be invented, which is going to lead to a huge need for rubber for the tires of those. The creation of consumer-based fertilizer, right? Like, so we're actually affecting the agricultural sector. Petroleum distillation and the processing of petroleum and the creating of one of the biggest advents actually was the creation of kerosene, providing a newer source of lamplight for most people. Also, maritime technology is going to take a huge burst forward in the Second Industrial Revolution with like iron steamboats and... Sorry, my wife's telling me to slow down.
Yes. He's too loud and too fast. And they can't understand you.
I think you guys will do fine. Now, anyway, so maritime technology like iron steamboats, excuse me, like for example, one vessel that you know of that has its roots in the late 1800s in the Second Industrial Revolution is the Titanic. The Titanic is a modern day not modern day. It's a early version of a steam-powered cruise vessel, right? If you've ever seen the film, they actually show really good shots of the interchangeable parts, the steam turbines, the propellers. This is a Second Industrial Revolution advent. A lot of people relate things like large steam vessels to the First Industrial Revolution, which is actually not correct because the First Industrial Revolution, like we said, was more about the mining and processing of iron and coal, the movement of it, laying of railroads, the creation of your baseline industrious items, right? So going forward, though, also social sciences and thoughts are going to begin to affect the ideas of sociology and lead to the ideas of evolution and the discovery of how old is the Earth? How does scholasticism and educational value move forward in societies from your earliest phases of ideas into the more provable ideas of science, right? So take the objective ideas of science, apply them to society, right? So when we were talking about Freud and his analysis of the family, right? He was understanding the ideas around him, right? Repression, the ultimate evil. When we talked about Newton's ideas turning into thermodynamics, and then Mendeleev and Faraday are going to take those and lurch those forward. So the biggest thing that set the tone for social sciences is actually the massive amount of data that began to be acquired. So if you remember when we talked about public health, the bacterial revolution, right? When we talked about Chadwick and his earliest data showing that it would actually be 1/20th the cost to actually lay iron pipes instead of people going in and removing human excrement by hand, right? So stop making a face. It's true. It's history. You got to get rid of it. Nobody wants to get sick. So anyway, now massive amounts of data is going to begin to be studied and acquired by the 1850s on everything. And I mean everything is in crime, children, birth rates, number of children receiving an education, death rates, rates of urban poverty. All that is going to be a huge lurch forward. And a great example of someone who begins to use this data is, of course, Karl Marx, right? When we talked about Marxian socialism, right, and the end objective being communism, his earliest studies used some of the ideas and a lot of the data that came out during the 1850s. That he's a great example of someone who's going to utilize that data that we've already talked about, right? But we're going to keep going forward in time, and we're going to talk about guys like, I never say his name right, Comte, all right? Comte is actually not to be confused with Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T, two very different people. Auguste Comte is a French social philosopher. I can never say his first name correctly, so I'm just calling him August, okay? So anyway, but Comte is a French social philosopher. He's the father of sociology. He came up with this idea called the positivist method, there we go, which is the scientific method of sociology, okay? So his ideas postulate and question how learning on a societal scale moves forward into ideas that are provable and ideas that are, quite frankly, something you can study, examine, and experiment, right? So he believes that all knowledge takes place in three phases. Nathan Hobbs, you'll like this a lot, okay? Because this is actually very, very neat. Because all ideas of societies take place in three phases. First, the theological, which is religion-based, right? Most people, whenever they're trying to answer questions, if they don't have scientific data to work off of, they turn to religion, right? Then you turn into your metaphysical, which is going forward into our Enlightenment era, our scientific revolution era, where the abstract is going to be applied, right? For example, Galileo said, God is not just a divine creator. He's much more of the clockmaker, hiding all of his data inside of mathematical proofs, right? So that's your metaphysical stage, right? You have abstract ideas that may be unprovable in some different schemes, right? Then you've got your scientific phase, which is understandable and positive, right? It's the idea that everything is laid out and we have proven ideas using science, right? So that's how our society moves, okay? So we've done so many similar things in our society current day, but the biggest example of the fascination with the positivist method is the idea of evolution, right? The idea of evolution is going to come around. Charles Darwin, of course, is going to take it and run with it, but there were a lot of early evolutionary thinkers that actually influenced Darwin early on. Charles Lyell is actually one of his best friends. Please put a star next to his name. He's a very important figure. Charles Lyell actually set up a lot of the foundational information that is necessary for Darwin's theories to actually advance. For example, he applied the positivist method to geology because, of course, according to the Bible, wait, I think I have that question in here. I'm going to save that question then, okay? So, applies the positive method to geology. The Earth, he believed, was formed over eons of pressure and movement. Now, before Lyell, everyone thought that the Earth was formed due to massive biblical events, right? Like the biblical floods, cataclysmic events like earthquakes, or God willing the movement of land, right? So those ideas are huge, and they're going to set the foundation for Darwin's early work. But like I said, Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin, actually very, very, very close friends. Charles Lyell actually reviewed some of the earliest versions of The Origin of Species. So anyway, moving forward, though, then you got Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, all right, which actually came before the both of them. Now, he actually issued the ideas. He's the metaphysical evolutionary thinker, all right? So, like I said, like this makes complete sense when you think about it. So the religion-based argument will be, we were created by God in his image, and we are the exact version of what he wants us to be, right? Jean-Baptiste Lamarck is your metaphysical stage. So he's actually going to issue the idea that forms of life rise from other old forms of life over very long processes. However, since it's metaphysical, his data was flawed. It was missing a lot of pieces, so it wasn't ever really accepted. It was kind of rejected by the community a lot. So then we move into Charles Darwin, your scientific phase, right? So friends with Lyell, persuaded his science, and also used fossil evidence to prove that life was in fact ancient. This is a huge premise, right? Because this goes against what a lot of early church teachings are going to tell you. Because according to the Bible, even if you stretch it, some people, like some biblical theologians, will stretch it and say 150,000 years. But most people using biblical evidence say that the earth is only about 6,000 years old. Now, we know that to not be true. The earth is actually 4.526 billion years old. That is insane, all right? And if we were to actually take the lifetime of Earth, right, and turn it into a football field, and we actually tried to find a distinct measurement of how long people have been involved in the history of the planet, human beings would take up one blade of grass before the following touchdown. But like, it would be the last blade of grass on that timeline is how long humans have ever been a part of it, right? So anyway, but this is a key concept. And his other big key concept is going to be the struggle for survival. Of course, we know his Origin of Species is his influential work. I'm not going to go into full tilt with the HMS Beagle and how he went to the Galapagos and how he studied all the finches and the turtles for years and years, because you already know that, all right? But going forward, he drew on Thomas Malthus's early ideas of population growth, right? So when he's talking about struggle for survival, Malthus always conjectured that a population will outgrow its food source, right? Just like after the Industrial Revolution, he said people will begin to outgrow their subsistence form of food, right? So, and he wasn't wrong. He was very pessimistic, but he wasn't completely wrong, right? So according to this idea of Malthus, that if you outgrow your supply of food, the strongest will prevail and the weak will fall. That's where Darwin brought in his influence, right? That natural selection, the idea that weak will be weeded out and the strong will survive and pass their genes on to the next generations, right? Darwin's core argument, of course, bases itself on chance differences. Now, this is the major thing that's going to lead to a lot of people rejecting Darwin's early work, right? So that's what we got to talk about next, is the controversy of Darwin's work, right? So the chance differences is in, like, for example, mutations in the study of genetics actually didn't like even begin until the early 1900s, after the Origin of Species ever came out. So he called them in his book chance differences, right? Like, oh, look, the short-necked giraffe model. This is one of his key arguments. That so if you've got the sweetheart, what's the tree that giraffes eat? It's like a, you know what I'm talking about? Someone with the thorns on it. That's why their neck's long. It's got a name. Can you look it up for me, Louise? All right, anyway, now the short-necked giraffe model, right? There are these trees, okay? These thorny trees in Africa, and as the trees began to grow taller, short-necked giraffes began to die off and not actually be able to pass their genetics or their traits, as Darwin put it, on to the next phase of life, due to the fact that the longer-necked giraffes that actually could provide for themselves actually became well-fed, went on to mate. Acacia tree. That's okay. Thank you, sweetheart. So the acacia trees that were taller, the longer necked giraffes who could reach them were the ones who were strong enough to survive, excuse me, and pass their traits on to the next generations. The reaction to his work is very mixed. Okay. ironically enough, people that he didn't even want to love it, loved it. Okay, the earliest groups of atheists in late 1800s England jumped on top of him. They were like, "This is the best thing ever. This proves God wasn't real." And Darwin was like, "No, no, 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 no. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying." And then the theologists are like, "How dare you lash out against God like this?" He's like, "No, no, 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 no. That's not what I'm saying." Like, so actually, Darwin got caught in this giant political crossfire where people accused him of being a minimalist and an atheist, and then other people accused him of being not enough of an atheist and not enough of a minimalist. There's actually a lot of amazing political cartoons and about this stuff, and a lot of reviewers are going to come into play, and they're going to say that Darwin's ideas are missing some key factors, but then others are going to come in and say, well, Darwin's ideas are revolutionary, right? So it's a huge mixed bag of reactions. Now, the mechanism controversy is, of course, the biggest thing that's going to cause this. And that's what we're referring to the mutations idea, right? So since there is no study of genetics and mutations and ideas like that, Darwin, even in The Origin of Species, didn't have any kind of mechanism for evolution to take place. He just called them chance differences, right? So it's going to lead to a huge, huge academic debate over is he right, is he wrong? But actually, no, it was never provable, right? So until the 1900s. And of course, this is an example of the public reaction to these things, okay? So you've actually got on the left, you've got a pro-Darwin argument, right? You've got a pro-Darwin argument. This man over here is afraid of his own shadow, right? The shadow being that we came and we are in a more evolved form of like great apes. And as you can see on his head, it says a fundamentalist, right? He's afraid of the idea that we may be better evolved forms of a lesser animal, the Lamarck idea, right? And then on the other side, you've got the anti-Darwin argument. Am I a man and a brother? ? And it's, of course, this missing link great ape gorilla, right? Trying to say that, like, what separates us? If we say that we're from, like, primates, then what's the thing that actually separates us at all? Are we not animals? And blah, 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 blah. So it's a very, 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 very intense political argument over the ideas of Darwin and the big feud. And that's what we're actually going to pick up. If we have school tomorrow, we'll pick up there. But then we got one more slide for you, and this is going to be it. And so then the following phase is going to be the twisting of Darwin's ideas, right? Taking Darwin's ideas and just really wrenching them across each other. And scholars are going to begin to try and take Darwin's ideas and apply them to fields that have nothing to do with like science in and of this way, and it's going to be used to rationalize political and economic motives, right? That brings on, of course, put a star next to this term, it's massively important, social Darwinism, right? Social Darwinism, which is stupid, by the way, all right? And like a lot of people, anybody who tries to rationalize that this makes sense is absolutely ridiculous. This is one of the biggest controversies. Like, for example, like Hitler used the ideas of social Darwinism to try and forward his motives, right? That's a good example of how these things are going to be twisted. He believes that human affairs drive people into unending economic struggles that determine the fittest for survival. Basically saying first world countries will prevail and they are meant to oppress third world countries, right? Now that's like a modern day idea. It endorses hatred of the poor, hatred of other races, hatred of underdeveloped countries, and also it endorses the ideas of imperialism. Let's go take over somebody because they can't do it themselves. And any negative or genocidal or bad things that happen along the way, it's because they're weak, right? Like, this is ridiculous, okay? However, that's where we're going to end now. That's all we're doing for today. But I hope y'all enjoy your snow day, and I hope y'all have a good rest of your evening. And you know what? If I send you an email, if I have another short one up tomorrow, I'll let you know. But we'll kind of play it by ear a little bit, all right? But I'll see you guys hopefully tomorrow, all right? See you then, AP.